Hello and welcome to Muse Jam session recording 167. My name is Dani Beaumont and I'm a product manager on the Adobe Muse team. I am joined today by a few colleagues. We've got Abhishek and Colleen, both of which are developers on the team, so it's excellent to have them here. They're going to help me watch chat as we go along. What I was about to say, before I remembered I didn't have my recording, is that we started putting these recordings on YouTube about 4 months ago, and I was just looking at the previous YouTube recording for HiDPI, and it's old and terrible sound, so at least we're generating a new recording. If you want to come back, or if you want to send any of your colleagues to the YouTube channel for Muse, this should be of higher quality. With that said, it's always good to have folks tell me a little bit about what your background is about. Muse has been shipping, it's probably 3.5 years old, coming up in the fall. We started shipping in May 3 years ago, and over that time, we've continued to improve our support for scalable vector graphics or images that can be dynamic in their resolution. And we're going to focus on that today. It's a little different than it was when we first shipped. We continue to evolve this. So I'm going to give you some of the latest information about optimizing your site. So let me go ahead and begin sharing my screen. Okie doke. And I'm here within the Muse application. We're going to take things down a little bit and just talk about the basics for a moment. But I do want to give a shout out to some of the links that I've given you in that tiny URL, the optimizing HiDPI content session notes, in essence, for today. So this is an Evernote document that you should be able to get to with this tiny URL if you're watching the recording. But it kind of talks a little bit about the web and just resolution. And I always hearken back, I guess, to the world of print. I did start as a product manager a long time ago in the world of print. And I used to work on Heidelberg printing presses. I worked on PostScript interpreters for those printing presses. And the thing that was interesting is if you wanted to do an extraordinary brochure with beautiful imagery and content that was just amazing, it might have taken hours for that image processor, that printing press, to render the content of that design. But the minute you flipped the switch and started printing those pages, it would print at whatever speed was necessary there. But when you handed that beautiful brochure to the viewer of your brochure, there was no consequence to the content. Obviously, it's a piece of paper. There's no load time. If you're a designer that is moving your mind towards the web, you need to really stop and pause and think about the consequences of your behavior as a designer to the viewers of your site. More and more, I've seen this over, really, it's accelerated over the past 5 years, I would say, to where there are so many devices that people can view content on. And the Muse team is constantly looking at ways that we can optimize what you're designing within the Muse application for different platforms, devices, browsers, you name it. Orientation, tablet, smartphone, portrait, landscape. Being able to make sure that that content is rendering really well is important. And some of these articles talk about just the consequence to slow load time. So how many people depart from your site? I mean, I'm sure you've done it. You go to a website, if it's not seeming to load quickly enough, you're out of there because you don't have a lot of time to waste. Or perhaps you're on a handheld device, you're on a phone, and you're trying to get to something very important, and the bandwidth is much slower. You may have a beautiful high-resolution iPhone 6 Plus, let's say, but the bandwidth that you're working with is very limited. So really looking at how you can have beautiful content on the web and think about your load times within Muse. Now, you know Muse is not a hand coding application. So what you're not going to do is go in there and tweak the code or tweak it across different browsers or different devices in order to improve that load time. That onus and responsibility is on the Muse team and how we are rendering the code that we export to the browser. But there are ways that you as a designer can make sure that the code we're generating is the best. So let's go ahead and jump in. Are we talking about sound issues here? I'm going to jump over and see what you're talking about real quick. I'm going to keep going, but give a shout out if there's a general problem with sound. Usually if the sound is a little funky, it could be your internet connection, and watching the recording later usually resolves that. Okay, I'm just going to start from scratch, very basic. So I'm going to go File, New Site. Now, if you are not familiar with HiDPI, let's talk about it a little bit. I'm able to come in and work on my new design here. So File, New Site, you'll notice allows me to select from alternate layouts. So you can select what is the first layout that you're going to do for your site. The purpose of alternate layouts is a means by which we can optimize content for your certain classes of devices. So the class of smartphones, then you've got tablets, and you've got desktop designs. And being able to create unique content for those 3 different mediums is the first way you're going to make sure your content is optimized. So when you think about a site that you're working on, some folks talk about mobile first, and I think you're really seeing that both from an ease of design standpoint on the web and also an optimization. So as a designer, if you think about the phone first, let's say, and what that layout might be, this idea of a card structure, card design, or grid structure that allows you to easily expand to larger devices, as a designer can kind of allow you to keep your head together. But being able to come in and choose what loads up, for example, on your lowest bandwidth device, let's say a phone, as compared to what loads up on a desktop, what could be a very large monitor, is that first area of optimization. For what we're going to do now, let's go ahead and start with desktop, but I could begin with phone and expand out from that. I'll go ahead and select it. And notice here at the bottom, I have resolution, and I can select either standard or HiDPI. I joke because our interface designer, Stephanie, was here yesterday, and I was going over the things that if you'd asked me, I wouldn't have done. When I heard about HiDPI within Muse, it sounded like a nightmare to me. The idea is that when you load up a site, it's going to load at standard resolution first, which is about 72 dpi. And then what happens is when the bandwidth is available, an image is going to load at 2 times that resolution. So twice the height, twice the depth in essence, height and width, or depth of resolution. So if I have a square that's, let's say, actual size 2 inches by 2 inches, I'm doubling the amount of dots or resolution that's being reflected in the HiDPI instance of that 2 by 2 square. My instinct was, you know what, if I'm loading 5 times the image resolution, a standard image, and then something that's 4 times that resolution, it's going to slow down sites dramatically. I was absolutely wrong. The HiDPI implementation that we're using is elegant and lovely. So let's go ahead and show that. I'm going to select HiDPI, and I do get a warning here that says, guess what? This could significantly slow down your site. Again, we'll talk about it. And you're allowed to back out of it or go ahead and use that HiDPI. At any time when I'm working, you can switch between standard and HiDPI. So if you have an existing site that you defined as standard resolution and you'd like it to be resed up, you want to improve that resolution, you can come in and make that change after the fact. So I don't have much content here, obviously, but if I chose to change that attribute after I've created my site, I can pull down on File to Site Properties, and that same option is there under, I believe, Content here. So on that Content tab, I can see the resolution for HiDPI, and I can toggle between that. Now let's talk about what this is doing and how it works on the page. So I've got a obviously incredibly simple page here. Nothing's on it at the moment. And I want to come in and bring up some mixed content. So as a designer, if you are familiar with, let's say, the metaphor of the web and desktop applications, the metaphor of print with desktop applications, you innately know this. Again, harking back to when I first started doing design work back in the day, I remember using a layout application. It was probably PageMaker back in the time, but I wanted to integrate text and an image together for a logo. Now, if you are going to typeset text in Photoshop, you've learned that doing that is going to make it resolution dependent. So if you have a lockup that includes an image and a logo, that lockup is going to be at the resolution of your image. A more ideal scenario, if you can get away with it, is to come in and render an image, let's say, from Photoshop, and then typeset the text in an application like Illustrator or InDesign, or in this case, Muse. And what that allows you to do is have the text be resolution independent. So let's take a look at some of this in action so it's not quite so boring. I want to come in and bring in a few things. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab some just traditional icons. So I've got a set of icons here, and we can kind of take a look at them. They're resolution dependent. They're at a particular size. I'm glad the router got reset. Hopefully your world is getting better. I'm going to select a number of these social images here, and I'm just going to come in and place them. And in fact, I will wake up pretty soon here, folks. Before I do that, let's go into the Assets panel. I want to take a look at what's going on as I'm working. So notice I've got nothing on my canvas, nothing in the Assets panel. I'm going to come on in and select some of those social icons. So we'll go with 1, 2, 3 of these, and I'll click on Open. And I'm just going to actually place them on the canvas. So I can press and drag the icon, but I'm just going to click and release. So click and release once, twice, 3 times. Now, interestingly enough, what happens here is because I've defined my site to be 2x resolution, what happens is anything that I place is automatically, if it's resolution dependent, is placed at 50% of actual size. So let's say you're a big Photoshop fan and you mock up your site design in Photoshop. What you probably want to do is go ahead and set your Photoshop resolution. Let's say you're going to go ahead and do that at 72 DPI. In the viewing level, when you're viewing your page in Photoshop, you'll want to view it at 50% of actual size to give you a sense of how that's going to render. Inversely, if you're designing in Photoshop, you can go ahead and set the resolution of your Photoshop layered comp, let's say, as double 72 DPI or 144 pixels. That's going to allow you to get a visual sense of the actual size of the content that you're producing. So these 3 icons, as I've placed them, let's kind of go back out to the Finder for a second and see if I can show this for a moment. I'm going to swing back out. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to that folder where I've got these icon sets. Let's just grab this heart. When I click on it, notice on the left, back within Muse, that's the size that it's placed at. And this is the actual size of this file. So anything I place is going to come in at 50% of actual size. What this means is that it's going to give Muse enough resolution to render both a HiDPI and a standard instance of any of these elements I've placed. So with this object that I have here, if I zoom on in to my Assets panel, notice I get an indicator that lets me know that I have 2x resolution. I have twice that file size available to render a HiDPI and standard instance of the image. If I were to come in and place another one, let's just grab this guy here. Notice as I press and drag, I can see my file size. If I come on in and I stop at 50% or less, it's going to be a 2x item. So it's going to have HiDPI availability. So I've just added it there. It's one of these guys. It's this top one here. And it says 2x. If I come back to the object, though, and press and drag it as slightly as, let's say, 51%, right there, notice that the 2x goes away. What I've told Muse, in essence, is that that particular graphic I don't want rendered at HiDPI. I want it to simply render at standard resolution. And the back-ended way that I informed Muse about that is by making sure that it was placed at more than 50% of actual size. So this is an important tool for you as a designer. Let's say you're working on a site and some elements in the site, your client's logo, which you only have as an image file, or a photograph that is incredibly beautiful but incredibly large. If some of the elements in your design you want to not be HiDPI, you want them at standard resolution, what you need to do is make sure when you place them within Muse, they're always 51% or greater in the placed resolution size. That tells Muse on the back end to not render a HiDPI instance. Let's say you have just a very large photograph, and it's an artistic photograph, and it doesn't have to have a great deal of clarity. You'll want to make sure that when you save that out and place it within Muse, it's 51% or greater. All right, let's kind of keep going with this concept. I've got these guys here, and I'm going to go ahead and exaggerate my RSS feed a little bit. But these are all kind of old-fashioned graphics, I would say, and it's a world before Muse supported something known as scalable vector graphics, or SVG. And if you do equate this to the world of print, it's as though for a long time, I think a good 2 years, Muse was only supporting what you would mentally think of as a Photoshop image file support. When you created content in Illustrator, what you would have to have done is saved for web and generated, let's say, a transparent PNG or a JPEG file to place into Muse. We handled the multi-res HiDPI aspects of that, but we didn't have support for scalable vector graphics. We have that now, and SVG really brings you into a totally different world for a moment, and we're going to kind of compare and contrast that a little bit. I'm going to come and place some SVG graphics that I have now, and these are illustrations that were created in Adobe Illustrator. The text was flattened to outlines in essence, so it's no longer a font, it's actually just vector content. And the beauty of that file format now is that when I come in to work with the file, it's resolution independent, just the way, let's say, a typeface would be. I'm going to grab 3 of these SVG files. Let's see. Okay, maybe just 2 of them. It's important when you save the file in Illustrator that you convert the text to SVG as you're placing it. I'm going to come in and place a couple of these guys. And as I press and drag, notice when they occur over here within the Assets panel, there's no indication about HiDPI or not. These are like typefaces. Let's go ahead and just stick with these 2 right here. Whoops. They behave rather like a font in that they are resolution independent. As I'm working, I don't really care about the size that I'm working with. So I'm free to come in and just kind of press and drag the size here, and you'll see the quality will render. Notice how Ike's Bike Shop, if I go really large here, it's looking pretty crummy. What we do is in that SVG, we're grabbing what we call a poster image, and it's really just to render on the design canvas here so that you can see what's going on. When I release the mouse, we're going to go ahead and query that SVG and render it at screen resolution again. So it looked a little fuzzy for a moment there, and now it'll come in clear. And that's going to remain true as I'm working. It's going to be resolution independent. All right, so I've got these elements. I'm just going to kind of give you a bit of a smorgasbord of file types. So these are 2 SVG files, and up here on top I've got PNG files in essence with transparent backgrounds that are resolution dependent. Let's go ahead and deal with a little bit of photos as well. I'll come on in and grab some images. Let's see what we have to choose from. Okay, so I've got a JPEG image here that I'm going to work with. And once again, let's see if I can do that again. As I press and drag here, notice my file size. This is a really large source file. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag it up to about 20%. And when I release it and look in my area here, I can see that it's going to be rendered at that 2x resolution. I can always come in and crop the guy down a little bit if I'd like. Just get this a little smaller to my actual image. And I'm going to go ahead and just make it a little bit larger. So at this point, if I want to see its size, I can just drag a little. I see it's about 38% of the original size. So I can be assured that that's also going to render as a high-resolution image. I'm going to bring this guy up here and maybe layer it to the back around here. Okay, so we've got kind of a few different things going on here. Another way you want to think about the world, let's talk about icons for a moment. So I'm showing you sort of old-fashioned icons, and if you search the web, you can go to lots of places that will give you resolution-dependent icons. There are other worlds, like Font Awesome, for example. Let me see if I can go there real quick here. And this kind of brings you to this interesting, somewhat hybrid world. So Font Awesome is kind of an open source resource. And if I come into the Icons tab, what I can see is a whole heck of a lot of icons. So depending on what you're looking for, I can see icon representations. Now, there are trade-offs within Muse around how you're going to deal with those icons. The advantage to these icons is that I could actually come in and save it out as a typeface, as a font. That will be like SVG. It allows you to select the characters within that typeface and work with them. And when you're resizing those, it's just like a typeface. You can make it larger, and you will be resolution independent and not really have to worry about the device that it's being reflected on, because it's going to load at the highest resolution as vector content, in essence, as I'm working. So we've talked about Font Awesome icons. If I have some time towards the end here, I'll go in and actually load this up and we can play with it. But that's another way you might look at the world here. Now, as I'm working, if I want to get a sense of what this design choices that I'm making are going to do to my finished work, we give you some ability to toggle the HiDPI feature on and off. So let's just take a look at that. I'm going to come into my widget library, and in the buttons area here, we have a toggle switch here, HiDPI on and off. I'm going to go ahead and press and drag that onto the canvas. This is kind of a funny widget for us because it has actually states to it. And if I come in and look, which most things do, but it has funny states. So if I come in under window and I look to states, you'll notice that this widget has an on state and an off state, and each of them have an up, over, down. So it's actually a button or a toggle. And what it allows you to do, I know that many designers use this just as a testing tool. Some designers actually reflect it in the finished work that they're doing as well. It allows you to choose to force, as the viewer of a website, whether or not you want those HiDPI images to render. So let's talk about a use case here. And if you want to play around with this, you can probably do it on your own if you have a mobile device. But if I go to muse.adobe.com, when we released HiDPI, we had a landing page that showcased that capability. So if I go to the current landing page, which is focused on Typekit, and I look at a previous release here, June 2014, this talks all about HiDPI. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and put it into the chat for good measure here. The way this is fun is if you actually browse to the phone layout. Let me try this, see if I get in trouble. I did get in trouble. Let's try this. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate on there and then go down to, actually we may have hidden this a little bit here. But what we do in the phone layout, so if you navigate, let me just see here if I can get us there. Might need to root around a little bit, but we have at the top of the page a HiDPI toggle switch that allows you to switch between HiDPI and standard. Let's take a look at how we can do it in our design here. So I've got this high definition, this HD icon here. The thing that's important is you can change this to any graphic you'd like. We are giving you example graphics. So these are actually image files. If I go to my assets panel, you'll notice here I've got the different states of this icon, and I'm free to come in and relink to any other graphic that I'd want. So this is just kind of an example of how it might work with you free to change it. I'm going to go ahead and place that there on the canvas, and let's go on in and get a sense of how this renders in the browser. So I'm going to pull down on File to preview the page in the browser. Muse will come in and render the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And notice that this HD little toggle here is red. What it's indicating is that I'm now, although my device, my Retina device, my high-resolution Macintosh here, supports HiDPI, I'm currently loading at a standard resolution. Let's see if I can get really tight. This is a tough one to show over screen sharing, but see how close we can get. What you'll notice is as I look here, let's see if I can even exaggerate it, I've got a lot of jaggies for this graphic right here. This is the one that I've placed that will not support HiDPI. If I come into the heart here as well, it's rather jagged. I don't know if you guys are getting nauseous here. What happens though is if I toggle on this HD, and I encourage you to try this on your own device because it's really difficult to see when you're screen sharing, what will happen is if this toggle switch is turned on, or if there is no toggle switch, the default state of any site you built is high definition, Muse is going to go in and render the site, and it's going to supply both the standard and 2x resolutions instances of those images. When I browse to that website, Muse will automatically download all the standard images and load the entire site, the entire page for me. In the background, asynchronously, it's going to continue to bring in the higher res images, and when they're fully loaded, in a way that you'll hardly even notice, it's going to re-render any of those HiDPI images and replace them. So the entire page will not reload, just those images. And this is where it's a little tough for you to see, but when I go ahead and hit this toggle, pretty darn quickly the images are going to come in at that higher resolution. So I can toggle it off, and it'll go back to the standard resolution, toggle on, and I get that higher definition. So for any image type file that is resolution dependent, that toggle switch is going to allow you to enable or disable it and test to see the load time, for example, for those higher resolution images and the quality. Now that relates to all of these image-like files, but for anything that's either SVG or is saved as something like a font awesome icon, that will automatically always render at the higher resolution. Now let's talk a little bit about the type of code that gets generated here. I just want to show this off before we get too much complexity. When I come in and preview this page in the browser, as we know, we've got a number of icons that are here, and they're referenced here in my Assets panel. If I preview the page in browser, and then we actually take a look at the code. So I'm going to view the page source. What you'll see is we'll have some interesting things going on. So we have this Found logo, we have an Amazon logo, we have a Picasa logo, and they're referencing the names in that images folder. When I placed them, it was called Social 17 Amazon. But notice what else is rendered in the code. You've got data HiDPI source, and in that same images folder, there's a 2x instance of that image. So it's going to render that higher resolution as well as the lower resolution as we're working. Now Muse just handles this for you. And the way that will work is, again, it will load the first one, and then if need be, it'll load the second into your design. Now there's another way that you can control image content and image size, I guess consciously as you're working. So if I were working with this image, and as we know it's pretty darn large, we could go ahead and view the source file, but let's just assume it's got some pretty heavy load time. And because it's a lovely high resolution image, I can come in and let's get some of these other elements out of the way. I can render this guy pretty large. So let's say I want to work with it. As you're noticing here, well, there you go. I'm at about 150% of actual size. I could go as large as, let's say, right here, 100% actual size. And it's going to render well, not in an HiDPI instance because of the settings that I've got here. I've gone over the 50% mark. When I'm working within Muse, if I were to create an alternate layout and place this image, so let's say I like this guy just the way it is, it's 100% of actual size. In fact, we can let's bring it back down to 50 because we're trying to make the world very high DPI. So I'll go ahead and let it be at 50% of actual size. If I had a lot of images, I might be concerned about this as I'm working. I'm going to go ahead and copy it. I'm going to go out to my site plan, and I'm going to create a phone layout. And in the phone layout, I'm going to come in and work with that graphic. So I'll come in and place it. And when I do so, I might be worried that this is just going to load too slowly. So I'm going to come on in and, I don't know why, I started using InDesign this weekend, and now I keep hitting the Shift key, which is what you don't have to do in Muse to keep proportional scaling. You've got to get out of a bad habit. So I've now gone in and rendered this guy in a smaller way. By default, when I place an image on different alternate layouts, it's going to link to the same source image. So if I come to my Assets panel, I can see over here, although it's very, very small, that I've got that image and that it has multiple instances of the image being placed. It's both on the home page for my desktop layout and on the home page for my phone layout. When we render the code, when we render this page, we take responsibility for creating a smaller image of that, a smaller version of that image for your phone layout. So in the code, they're going to make sure that you're not loading big, heavy images as you're working within the design and the site. Now, there are some other backdoors that are worth mentioning. Let's see if I can get this jiggered up quickly enough. I'm going to come into the desktop layout, and what I need is an incredibly large image. So give me just a second. I'm going to make something disgustingly large. I could probably search for something disgustingly large. But I want to, yeah, friends never let friends load up photos they're not really familiar with what they're going to be showing. So let me just get a safe image real quick here. I'm going to go into, let's see. All right, so we've got one of our starter files, and they've got some pretty large images here. So I've got this lovely image, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make it extremely large. And I'm going to go a different way of doing that. Let's grab that image. I'm going to kind of cook the books a little bit here. I want to come in and save this to be so big it's outlandishly large. So what I want to do is, I don't want to constrain my proportions necessarily. Let's just bring this guy up to 4,000 pixels in width. You'll notice here at the 72 DPI, this is 55 inches by 34 inches if it were actually rendered at 72 DPI. So it's foolishly large, and I'll show you why I'm doing this in a moment. You go ahead and save this into this HiDPI folder, call this very large JPEG file. All right. So as a designer, as you're working, let's say you know exactly what you're doing, and you need a huge image that you want to place within Muse, and you think you know better than us, which could be true. I'm going to come into another page here, and I'm going to come and place this image. So I now have that really big image available, ideally, my very large image. See if we can get to the file size here. There's a lovely Mac bug that makes it really hard to tell. Well, our very large image is still very small, but it's 564K. But you can see when I'm looking at it that it should be pretty big. I'm going to go ahead and click on Open. And I'm going to go ahead and just click and release to place it. And when I come into my Assets panel here, I've got my very large image, and it's placed at 2x resolution, and it's pretty big. But interestingly enough, it's going to stop at a certain size. And let's see if this is working for me. I'm going to hover over this image. This is always a tricky one to kind of get revealed for you. So in my Assets panel, I want to roll over this guy. All right. All right, I'm going to keep going a little bit. Let's make it even larger. Let's take a look at it. All right, so what happens in a very interesting way is, yep, there it is. Geez, it likes to be mean to me. So notice as I'm rolling over here, I get some tooltips. Notice how I've got my HD toggle image there, and it's showing as I roll over it, it's giving me some good intelligence about what it's doing with that image. So the original size was 300 by 300. It's been resampled to half that for HiDPI. There you go. You guys is my witness. I rolled over that image 18 times and now I'm getting my tooltip. What happens is when the image is placed, notice that interesting things happen. It says original asset size is 4000 by 2496. When you place something in Muse, it's never going to place any image larger than that 2048 by whatever the proportional alternate is. It's going to max out the height or the width to 2000 pixels, 2048. Because we believe that by default, if you're placing an image larger than that, no matter how large the image is, perhaps you don't really know what you're doing, because the load time for an image much larger than that would be immense. So we automatically do that for you. We kind of, no matter how large you save it, we're going to just make a decision that you really didn't mean it. If I come in and make it even larger, and I hope here, what usually will happen is if there's a lot more data for that image, we'll get an indicator here that it's been resized to be larger than the web is going to render at that higher resolution. And we're allowed to, we basically indicate to you that you can come in and import data larger than that 2048 to bring in the higher resolution. So I guess in summary on that, if you're finding that you're defining some pages with very, very large images and you go to place those elements, it's going to max out at 2048. If you come into the Assets panel, you can tell Muse if you've resized it larger than that max and you want to bring in the higher resolution, clicking on the image will allow you to go in and grab that higher resolution example. Now, in general, though, we're doing the right thing because the question is, why are you loading such incredibly large images into the web? So it's something you can override if you do it by specific intention, if you do know what you're doing there to make it happen. All right, there's one other area that we want to focus on here. We've got a sense of how these images are handled. Let's just see. We're going to come into our main guy again. If you're wanting Muse to do absolutely nothing, so let's say you don't like the way that Muse resamples your content. When I place images that have transparency in the background, we're going to automatically define that as a transparent ping. We will resample images in many instances. The way to make sure that we pass through and don't touch your images in any way is to make sure that you are defining it at the exact size you want to place it. So if it's HiDPI, you're going to do double the resolution or double the size. If it's standard resolution, you're going to make sure when you place it, you just click and release to place the image at that actual size. All right, let's stop and see where we are with questions here. We still have some time. We can jump around a little bit. Okay, we've got an ask for looking at a standard site to HiDPI. Totally terrific. I don't know if everybody thinks the audio went out. Again, I think it's kind of, wow. All I can say is sometimes Connect, I think, isn't great. As I mentioned, the recording will be pretty tight on YouTube. Sorry, folks. Not always a perfect world for screen sharing. No wonder I felt like I was talking to myself for real. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Do we assume you have audio now? Just doing a quick sound check. Maybe if I type it, you can hear me. No audio. Quick audio check. How is audio now? Hi there, this is Dani. How are we doing with audio? All right, Michael, thanks for hanging in. Sorry, sometimes we're only as good as tech. Okay, I don't know when I lost you, but let's see where we can pick up. Damn, sorry, folks. I hate talking to myself. Okay, what was the last thing you heard? You probably saw what I was doing, but you couldn't hear me. All right, I'm going to jump into the question down below. But what I will suggest is that we can open the floor for questions. We have some time. So we can circle back. Muse damp samples. Okay. So in a nutshell, Bob, the way that works is if you really know what you're doing and you have a very, very large image that you want to place at a very large size, when you place it within Muse in the Assets panel, you can, when you resize the image to beyond the 2014 or 2048 height or width maximum, you can go back to the Assets panel and ask that Muse bring in that much higher resolution. The question is, why are you doing it and what was the effect that you were looking for there? Because we usually are pretty right when we say that we shouldn't bring something in any larger than that. Another point that I do want to make about how HiDPI works is that we offer HiDPI for images when you place them. One of the exceptions around that is if you define something with a browser fill. So if I come in and let's say I want to add an image here and I grab that very large image and I define it as a scale to fill the container, let's say, or fill the web browser. This will not render. Notice here under very large image, I've got it placed on my home page, but then I've got it defined as a background image, and it's not 2x resolution. We're not able to know when you resize the browser dynamically where you are with that resolution and serve up both the 2x resolution and the 1x resolution. So HiDPI works in its two forms for everything except background fills that are set to scale to fill the container. And it kind of makes sense because the browser can't know really when you're previewing or when you're viewing something in the browser how large you're going to make that display. So we rely on the maximum resolution for any background fill images that we're working with. There was an ask that we come in and look at changing something to HiDPI. It's really pretty elegant and simple, and I personally did this about 87 times when we were working on the starter files within Muse. So if you're in an English-speaking country, unfortunately, right now, this is a trial that we did in the spring, but I can come into, under Help, the Welcome page. And if you click on the Create tab of the Welcome page, you'll see some starter designs. If you're in a non-English speaking place, don't worry too much. In your browser, point to musestarters.com. Actually, you don't even need to go there. If you go to muse.adobe.com and then click on the tutorials area, down below here, you'll see all of the starter designs, both as a downloadable file that you're free to use and as one that you can preview in the browser with a whole lot of tooltip help videos. These are here for you. Let me show you, though, how I can toggle high DPI and low DPI. When we delivered these, we published them to the web in the preview mode as high DPI, and then the downloadable mode, we went ahead and set it as standard. So if I come back into the Muse application, and let me come on in and open up this exposure example. So if I take a look at it, I'm on my landing page, and I go and look at my assets, you'll notice that nothing is set at high DPI. There's no 2x value here. So this is a standard site that I've opened up without high DPI enabled. If I pull down on File to Site Properties, and we go into that content area here, notice under the resolution dropdown it says standard. I'm going to come on in and say go ahead and change this to high DPI. Yes, I really mean it. And I'll click OK. And to the extent that the world wants to be nice to me today, let's just see. Yeah. It takes a second to re-render, so you'll notice that it didn't say 2x until I started clicking here a little bit. It's a bit of a bug, but it will come in and render that. But notice what happened there is it went on in, and in the instances where the images that were placed into the site had double that resolution, it went ahead and indicated that to me. So as I look through, there may be some that were placed. So you'll notice here, see, this is kind of a perfect example. We've got this exposure background that we're looking at. In the instance where it's placed as a background browser image, I'm not getting the 2x, but I do get it for any other instance if it's placed within the site. So it's automatically rendering those as 2x resolution. I'm going to swing back and see if that answered the question, and then see what you all have for any other questions. So from what I understand, and I'm happy to ping any of the engineers that are on this session with me as well, in the instance where you define a background container, so if you draw a container and you fill it with something that's set to scale to fill, and you define that as a 100% width object, or if you define the browser fill to be to scale to fill or scale to fit the container. Those three cases, we're not going to have multiple resolution images. We're just going to serve one up. And that's because the user is going to determine the size of that based on the width of your browser. So to be really clear, because why not? I think we have time. Back here in Muse, when I come in and do a couple things, I'm going to come in here and just place an image. Grab this guy. If I place it here, it's all good. If I come in and create a container, so let's say I've got this container here, I'm going to toggle it to be a full width object there. So I've gone in and hit that full width icon. And with the container still selected, I click on Fill to add an image. And I can grab that same image, or we'll grab a different one just to vary it up a little bit. If I set this to be scale to fill or scale to fit, because it's a 100% width object, that is going to dynamically change, and that will pretty much cause Muse to not be able to control your image. It's just going to serve up one image. The last way that we would not be able to control it is if you come into the browser fill and you select one of these images as a background browser. How's that for a tragic design? When I preview in the browser now, if the gods want to be kind to me today, assuming I set this as a HiDPI site, so let's just come into site properties, make sure we still have that set. Okay, we're going to change this resolution to be HiDPI. And I'll click OK. When I render this in the browser, this image here is going to have two instances. This browser background is not going to, because as I'm scaling to resize my browser, let's just see what I've got that set to. So under browser fill, I've got it tiling. So let's set that to scale to fill. Try this one more time. So as I resize my, come on, demo gods, be kind to me. Browser fill, scale to fill. Okay. Let's give it a scale to fit. So notice how my image here in the background, see how my browser fill is scaling, as well as my 100% width, this sort of anchor thing, boat thing, is scaling to fill the container as well. If I come in and view page source, although I'm HiDPI, I'll get two instances, that 2x, if I just go in and try to find 2x. I've got one for the image that I placed. The smaller image that's here is going to render at 2x, but I probably don't notice that that's one of one. That's the only instance of a 2x image on the site, because the other two are set to scale to fill the container. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. So for alternate layout, slideshows render way too slow, you're saying. Again, this is where you can play with your own performance. We do use default subsampling. So if you create a slideshow and you have a thumbnail and a larger image, we're going to subset that to the appropriate resolution. If you find it's too slow, you can make it even smaller. Bob's suggesting, right. Well, to a large extent, Bob, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I guess you don't like our threshold, but we do subsample that image for the phone layout. Whether or not it's enough, there may be some room for improvement there, or letting you have more controls over it. All right, we've got about 7 more minutes left. Open to any general questions that you have. I think I still have some colleagues that are with us. Any other questions that you have for HiDPI? 2 weeks from now, I'm going to switch a little bit. Actually, we can continue to answer questions. 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about wireframing and the workflow there. The idea of building interactive prototype within Muse to get some sense of your site design, and then using that, not throwing it away, but using it to render a full screen version. Sorry about technical difficulties today. All I can say is the YouTube video I'm going to try to delete the blank spot in the middle where I repeated myself. I'll probably let it be, but it will have the full recording and the sound will be good. If there are topics that you want to, I'm looking here now. If there's jam session topics you'd like to have, let me know. We haven't done that in a while. How did you do that session? So there's a request here for looking at existing site and show how it was created. We can do that. I'll be honest, one of the funny parts of life these days is that a lot of the how did you do that. So if you go to Site of the Day and shop for some sites, a lot of them are using third-party widgets, which adds a lot of functionality. But we can definitely kind of dig in and take a look at some of the effects that are being used on existing sites, and we can dissect them. So I'm open to putting that on the docket in the next month or so. So we've got HiDPI at the end of the month, and September is pretty open for the agenda. What would help me with that immensely is if you send requests for sites that have been built that you want to know how they're constructed. So we'll put up on Facebook and ask that where folks can go to Site of the Day and pick sites that they'd like to dissect and learn more about before we do that session. Okay, I think we're ready to call this one. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. If there's anything that we didn't cover, go ahead and throw it in the chat that you wish we'd have covered on the topic. And we will see you again in 2 weeks. If you're not in the beta, get in the beta. I'm just telling you. Allie's in the beta. Should they join the beta, Allie? What do you think? I think it's a good place to be. So if you're interested in that beta, you're going to go to museprerelease.com, and you need to have an Adobe ID. You need to be a paid Creative Cloud subscriber, but you're able to download a beta version of Muse that can run alongside the shipping version of Muse. The beta version, you should not do production work in it, but if you're interested, especially in the area we're talking about, which is how to optimize image content across different devices and platforms, we're exploring some really interesting ideas over the next few months. So I encourage you to come on in. Can't tell you why right now, but you will be pleased if you come check it out. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Go ahead and look to YouTube for the recording if you'd like to. It'll be posted on Facebook as well. And we'll talk to you again soon.